Good afternoon, viewers. Welcome to a special episode of this podcast with yours truly, Joel Bhagwandin. As I mentioned to you, as I said yesterday, that my next podcast would actually be on Friday. But last night, some, there were some events that took place within the political economy that that you know of. The infamous press conference that we were all waiting for, but it was not what we were expecting. It was a press conference from one of the contending political parties uh, by the sanctioned entity, the Team Mohammed's group, the principals of Team Mohammed, that held a press conference to complain to the public about something they were already cautioned about. All you had to do is read the implications, read and understand the implications of the OFAC sanctions. Now the banks are taking action. You're complaining about victimization and political victimization. It is a highly unfounded view that what is taking place, what is happening to them with respect to the banks closing, terminating those accounts or notifying them of termination of those accounts, discontinuation of banking relationship, has nothing to do with political prosecution or political victimization. So this is my objective here this afternoon, is to walk you through and don't take what I say at face value. I will point you in the direction where you can go and independently do your own research. Everybody in this country can read. We have a lot of smart people. People can read and comprehend for themselves. Now, let me explain to you why the bank acted in this manner. In 2009, Guyana enacted the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism Act. The Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism Act is an international convention. It is an international it is an international piece of legislation that, as long as your country is an open economy, you're integrated with the rest of the world, you're integrated with the global financial system, therefore means you have to abide by international laws, international rules, international regulations that govern the international financial sector, the global financial system. And the global legal framework governing, regulating the financial sector as regards money laundering, protecting the system from money laundering or money laundering risks and financing of terrorism risk. There is this international convention that countries have to subscribe to and adopt those legislations. So some of you who are old enough would know that before 2009, you could have walked into a bank, present your ID card, and open a bank account with minimal questions asked. Now, I am a banker by training. I'm a banking and finance professional by training. I work in the banking and finance sector my entire professional life, which spans over 17 years, nearly almost 2 decades. And I started my banking career in 2007. I finished high school in 2006. I wrote CXC 2006. I started working in the banking industry in 2007. 2007-8, until we had the new act, the anti-money laundering legislation in place, 2007, 2008, there was no requirement for proof of address and a long list of questions and due diligence that you have to go through. It was very easy to open an account. 2009, when the AML came into being, the AML Act came into being, we were subject to compliance training, and the banks had to invest in the creation of a compliance department. All the financial institutions. There is a period of heavy training, and the banks now had to abide by those regulations. And so it was no longer as simple as it was before 2009 to establish a bank account. Now, I give you this history because I want you to understand and appreciate from the place from where I'm coming from. This is not speculation, this is not opinion. I'm walking you through the process. And then I'll come to why these persons why the candidates of a certain political party, why they're facing the consequence that they're facing. I'll get to that. Under the Anti-Money Laundering and Financing of Countering the Financing of Terrorism Act, there are a series of regulations which is referred to as subsidiary legislation under the Act. You can find these regulations and the principal legislation on the Bank of Ghana website. Under these regulations, there are three categories of risk under which customers are categorized. There is a category for high risk customers, medium risk customers, low risk customers. The high risk customers category, or the high risk category, includes a category that is a subcategory of customers known as politically exposed persons. Politically exposed persons, which the acronym PEP, 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 politically exposed persons. So we call them PEP. The Act defines who is a PEP. And if you go and you read that Act now as I speak, and you look for the definition and interpretation, it defines a PEP as someone who holds certain political offices, that's in the government sector, as well as politicians on the opposition side. You're a member of a political party, you're an active member of a political party, you sit in the National Assembly as an opposition, you're an active member of a political party contesting an election, you are a politically exposed person. And the Act defines a PEP as not only those persons directly are considered PEP, but their close associates, their family members and close associates. That's the definition for a PEP. So, for example, if I was a member of a political party contesting the election, if I was a member of a political party contesting the election, it means that my immediate family members will be considered PEP. My children will be considered PEP. My close associates who are known would be considered PEP. That's according to the definition. So that's the first thing I want to point out, the definition for a PEP. What other categories of customers are considered high risk under the anti-money laundering legislation? Gold miners, real estate operators, developers, auto dealers, high cash intensive businesses, cambio dealers, and high net worth individuals and families, just to name a few. So, this incidentally, this sanctioned entity, was by virtue of the business they're operating in, which is a gold exporter. Under the AML legislation, they were already high risk in the banking sector. They were already high risk. But now they're contesting an election and form a political party. It's just that they're not just a gold operator, gold or operating in a high risk industry. They're now also another category of the high risk, where they become a PEP, and all their candidates and members and associates and so automatically become PEPs. Now, when you read the International Convention and understand it, this risk, the high risk, the compliance, to be in compliance with the Act, this entity was the subject of the most severe international financial sanction, which is the OFAC sanction. As a result of that, financial institutions that have banking relationships with this entity, they automatically are at risk, and therefore they have to de-risk by terminating that relationship, because if they don't, then they stand to lose the correspondent banking relationship. What happens if we are to lose correspondent banking relationship? If our local financial sector lose their correspondent banking relationship, it means that we cannot pay for imports, we can't pay for goods online, we can't pay for the 90% of goods that we consume that is imported on the supermarket shelves. We can't pay for that, and we can't sell our produce that we export to international markets. There's a complete cutoff from the international system. That's the implication, and this is a serious matter. This is not, persons have been taking this thing lightly, persons have been denying the gravity of it, particularly the sanctioned entity and their associates and their apologists, denying the gravity, trying to downplay and trivialize the gravity of this issue. This is a very, very serious issue. That is the implication. Now, the question you may want to ask, so what happened to all the other persons who are PEPs? Are they subject to the same risk? Are they not allowed to conduct business with a financial institution? They are allowed to conduct. Under the Act and the regulation, a high risk category of customer, they are subject to a heightened degree of due diligence and scrutiny. In this case, here you have a case where you actually have someone who has been sanctioned for money laundering under the International Anti-Money Laundering Convention, and we have a legislation in our country governing that. So that's the difference. So other PEPs, yes, they could go about conducting their business and transactions as per normal, but they would not know that internally in the bank, their compliance department, that they're subject to a higher degree of scrutiny and risk. And if the banks have any reason to believe or any reasonable grounds to suspect that there is an unusual pattern of transaction based on transaction frequency, transaction value, they can file something that is called a suspicious transaction report with the financial intelligence unit, and you would not even know. You would not even know. The banks wouldn't tell you that, but you would do your transactions as per normal. The distinction here is that you have an entity who is classified as high risk under the Act and who's actually been sanctioned under this convention, who's actually been sanctioned under this convention for money laundering. Therefore, the financial sector has to de-risk itself to protect the financial system of this country. Otherwise, all of us will suffer the consequence. Now, importantly, I want to we tend to have a short memory in this country. We tend to have a very short memory in this country. Now, let's go back a little bit to our recent history. On a related issue, one of the political motives of the opposition combined with this particular political entity, their objective is, or they're hoping rather, to get a minority government, for the PPP to be a minority government, because they know they can't win the election. They're not going to win the election. What they're hoping for is to get a minority government, a dispensation that we have already experienced. Now remember, this EML legislation was enacted in 2009. Then you had elections, I think, in 2011 or 2012. Following that 2011-2012 election, we had a minority government. The combined opposition controlled the National Assembly. And so there was a deadlock in the legislature. Because the opposition controlled the National Assembly and the PPP had the executive, they had the presidency. Therefore, they formed the government. That negatively impacted our country. And you must go back and read up on these issues, these events, and understand and process the implications and what we have averted. As a result of that deadlock in the National Assembly, bills were rejected. We couldn't pass bills because the government brings something to the National Assembly, the opposition blocks it using their majority, so it can't go forward. The government brings the national budget to the National Assembly, the opposition institute budget cuts, which was unprecedented, and it stymied the country. But more importantly, by virtue of us having to sign on to these international regulations, anti-money laundering regulations, and implement the regulatory and legislative framework in our country to govern our financial system, there is an international body that has the responsibility of overseeing the implementation and that conducts periodic country review on the anti-money laundering framework, the legislative framework, as well as they conduct periodic reviews and evaluation on the effectiveness of its implementation. So there is the legislative framework, and then flowing from the legislative framework, you have to establish the institutions. Some of the institutions are, for example, the Financial Intelligence Unit that has its mandate defined in that legislative framework. SOCU is another institution that was set up under the AML framework to deal with money laundering transactions, to deal with these type of issues. So when the FATF conducted their country review, they found a number of deficiencies, and those deficiencies had to be remedied by way of amendments to the legislative framework, amendments to the Anti-Money Laundering Act. And because of the deadlock in the National Assembly, the government could not enact those amendments, and the failure thereto, the failure to pass those amendments, resulted in the FATF body, the Financial Action Task Force, the international body, and through the Caribbean arm of the FATF, which is CFATF, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, flagged Guyana for these deficiencies to the point where we were grey listed. Now, so to be grey listed, the next stage is blacklist. And if we were blacklisted for the failure of instituting the necessary amendments to remedy those deficiencies in the legislative framework, then we would have certainly lose all our correspondent banking relationships, and there would have been a complete cutoff from the international financial system, which in turn would have crippled our economy, which means we would have been crippled. Because if we are cut off from the international financial system, there will be no investment, we can't produce, we can't sell our goods to the rest of the world, there won't be no foreign currency coming into the country. Nobody will do business with Guyana because they can't send or receive payment anyways. And so you'd have been in a state pretty much like Venezuela. Venezuela is sanctioned, and Venezuela is cut off from the financial system, and that is why for them to survive, it's a lot of drug trafficking, drug trade, and smuggling, illegal activities that is supporting the regime, that the regime, not the country Venezuela, but the regime is surviving on illegal activities, illegal trade, illegal smuggling. Well, smuggling is illegal, and drug trading activities. The Maduro regime is surviving on that. And that is why they survive sanction, because the country has not survived. The country has gone to the dogs. From one of the richest countries in the region to the poorest, where people eating out of the garbage. That is the state we would have been in. Our people would have, we have to go and look for opportunities. The country, everyone would have to leave the country. Similar state like Venezuela. We are too small and fragile as a country and an economy to be displaced and disintegrated and isolated from the rest of the world. We are too small and too fragile. We can't survive. We cannot economically survive without being part of the global economy, being part of the global financial system. We simply can't. So, coming back to the 2014 period, you don't have to take my word for it. Just Google FATF country review or FATF grey listing Guyana 2013, 2014. This is what FATF, this is I'm going to read two paragraphs here. 21st of November 2013, I'm reading from FATF website. 21st of November 2013. The headline reads, CFATF decides to call for countermeasures against Belize and Guyana. The Caribbean Financial Action Task Force has identified Belize and Guyana as jurisdictions with strategic AML CFT deficiencies that pose a risk to the international financial system. Belize and Guyana are subject a call by CFATF on its members and other jurisdictions to apply countermeasures to protect the international financial system. from the ongoing and substantial money laundering and terrorist financing risks emanating from these countries. Dominica has made sufficient progress in addressing deficiencies since the public statement of May 2013. Now, that is their statement based on their country evaluation, 21st of November 2013. This is another one, the 30th of May 2014. This is when we had a minority government. Bear that in mind. Headline reads, CFATF decides to call for countermeasures against Guyana and recognizes significant progress made by Belize. So in the first one that I read in November 2013, both Belize and Guyana were flagged. Between then and between November 2013 and May 2014, Belize instituted remedial actions, and so they were acknowledged, they were recognized for the significant progress made. But this is what they had to say about Guyana. The Caribbean Financial Action Task Force has identified Guyana as a jurisdiction with strategic AML CFT deficiencies and has called on its members and other jurisdictions to apply countermeasures to protect the international financial system from the ongoing and substantial money laundering and terrorist financing risks emanating from Guyana. CFATF has referred Guyana to the FATF, which is the umbrella body. CFATF recognized the significant progress made by Belize to address. So two countries were flagged at the same time. One made progress and one did not. Why? We did not make progress because of the deadlock attributable to the minority government. And this is the objective of the combined opposition again. This tells you we don't have to look far for case studies. This tells you, look at our own history. Look at our own history, the implications of a minority government. Can we afford to go down this road again? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, two important points there. We were once flagged for deficiencies in the legislative framework. Under the dispensation of a minority government. And that is what triggered snap election in 2015. It is this deadlock and the risk of becoming blacklisted, which would have worsened the situation, that triggered the snap election, and the rest is history. Today, those same persons want to repeat history. We must not allow that to happen. Just reflect on our own history. Now, with that said, having established that historical background and context, coming back to the list of candidates and the claim that this political party and their affiliates are victims, or that they're victims of political discrimination. I'm going to end on this last but not least important point for you to reflect on. And again, I will urge you, don't take it at face value. Please go and do your own research, read for yourself, verify for yourself, look at other case studies, study the Venezuela case study, look at our history in that period when we were a minority government. You don't have to do too much of research. Our own case study and Venezuela case study. If the incumbent had really wanted to victimize the sanctioned entity, if they had really and truly view them as a legitimate political threat, And if they had really wanted to cripple that sanctioned entity, under the EML Act, I want you to go to Part 4, Sections 38 to 66 of the EML Act. Part 4, Sections 38 to 66 of the EML Act of 2009, AML CFT Act of 2009, and read those provisions that establish the penalties or the consequences. Those provisions speak to the consequences for breaches of the EML. It speaks to the legal tools, the legal instruments at the authorities' disposal to apply to particularly sanctioned entities for money laundering, whether that was on account of investigation and findings within our jurisdiction, or whether it is from another jurisdiction. Read the Act, what it says about that, and what it says about freezing of assets, financial assets. In other words, if the government really wanted to cripple them, the government has at its disposal, they're empowered to utilize these legal tools to freeze their assets. But the government did not. The authorities did not. They refrained from doing that. They were allowed to close their bank accounts. I'm speaking of the principal sanctioned entity here now. They were allowed to, they were accused of tax evasion in the sum of over $10 billion. They were allowed to close their accounts and walk away with truckloads of cash in the sum of billions of dollars, not that they're now storing within their premises. If the government really wanted, in the US, they would have those assets would have been frozen. We have the same law and the same provision and the same mechanisms and the same tools. I'm pointing this out to you to understand that if the government really wanted to cripple these people, all they had to do is freeze their assets. They would not have gotten a cent. And if they did not get a cent, then where they would have gotten the money from to do what they were doing? All of that would have come to a halt. So when we speak of political victimization, and you speak of things like ungratefulness, you got to think the subject matter, individuals and entities have to really think about that, provided that they're receiving proper legal counsel and advice. I point this out to you to dispel the notion that there is no political prosecution, there is no political victimization, and the truth of the matter is that the government has actually not utilized full force of the authority that they could have legally to cripple this entity if they wanted to. Think about it. Just go and read the law. Read the AML law, Part 4, Sections 38 to 66. So, I think I've said enough on this topic. I think I've made the point. So I'll end here. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Please go do your homework. Read those things that I point you to. Don't allow yourself to be misled, misguided. Do your own research, form your own opinion, your own conclusion, not an opinion based on what somebody else says or what is fed to you. Not even me. My objective here is to bring awareness of these issues, to bring awareness public awareness to the gravity, the seriousness, the implication, to hopefully, hopefully sift through the noise, and in your quiet moments, in your own time, do your own research, form your own conclusion on these issues, and don't take anything at face value. Thank you. Have a good rest of your afternoon, and see you on Friday.